Welcome back, gang. It's Deltia from Deltiasgaming.com. The Elder Scrolls Online completed its 10-year anniversary this year and had the launch of its newest chapter, The Gold Road. But a decade after its launch, is ESO still a must-play MMORPG in 2025? In this video, I'm going to give you an honest, in-depth review of The Elder Scrolls Online after spending thousands of hours in the game across all servers in many characters. We will cover all the game's critical aspects, including questing, combat, PvP, monetization, including some pay-to-win concerns, the active player base, the housing system, and more. Timestamps are below if you wish to skip ahead to a specific part, but you should not watch the whole video. Hit that like button if you get something out of this, and give me a comment what do you think about Elder Scrolls Online. MMORPGs and ESO in particular are in a curious phase and have faded from popularity over the years, but with the Elder Scrolls IP, how has ESO evolved over time, and what makes it stand out in the sea of MMORPGs? The first part about Elder Scrolls Online is the open world, and this is one of the big features of the game, its expansive world of Tamriel. The Elder Scrolls franchise has always been known for its incredibly deep lore, and the ESO brings that same depth to an online setting as much as possible. Someone recently asked me, why do people play MMORPGs? And I think it's mainly due to the social element. Sure, you have Skyrim, Morrowind, and other single-player Elder Scrolls games, but you want to enjoy the Elder Scrolls with friends, and ESO delivers that with also the same depth of storytelling. In ESO, you can quickly lose yourself in the game's many quest lines, which are voice acted by talented actors, bringing this story to life that other MMOs on the market just cannot match. And that's a massive advantage for ESO compared to other MMOs, is having these generic go kill 10 rats and come back kind of quest line. No, these are voice active, they have some depth, and they have recurring characters and themes, and give a general continuity from the original base game all the way to the DLCs and expansions. If you love lore in the Elder Scrolls, this MMO is an absolute masterpiece. Next up is zones, and another strength and or negative of ESO is the sheer volume, insane amount of content in zones you can explore. And if you're like me, you ever jump into an MMORPG after years on the market, it's like a massive series of quest givers and pop-ups, and it's hard to prioritize what to do, where to go, and why. ESO has made some strides into this, kind of slowly drip feeding players quests and priorities and where to go. Specifically, they added a zone guide that has made it a lot easier for players to navigate and have some priorities alongside the simplistic quest log, driving you towards completing the main story quest. Even after 10 years, I still love the main story quest with featuring Molag Bal and a band of other interesting characters. It's still just a really good, hearty Elder Scrolls story. And just like traditional Elder Scrolls games, you have the freedom to go anywhere and do anything in the open world. So no, this is not going to force you to float around a stupid boat like Lost Ark, doing countless boring quests if you don't want to. And this is at the core, is the freedom to do and go where you want in Elder Scrolls Online. I'm telling you, when I go play other MMORPGs and I have to breadcrumb go from one stupid 10 kill rat quest to another, I cannot stand it. ESO does this very, very good. So in 2024 and beyond, you can go to a gazillion different locations. Vardenfell and Morrowind, Somerset Isles, Elsewhere, Western Skyrim, Greymore Caverns, and Blackreach, Blackwood, just all over the map in cool areas you probably never have played in the other games. And they keep on tacking on more and more spaces and more zones. In fact, you have to kind of go zoom out clearly to the map and go to some mystic areas like the Sigic Order because they're running out of room. There's so much stuff to do and go. Now, speaking of stuff to do and go, the latest expansion. This was the Gold Road expansion for 2024. It added a new zone that you can explore into Cyrodiil, and the expansions you have to buy in addition to the base game in a sub, which I'll talk about the monetization a little bit later, but the game can get very expensive very quickly. So they always release typically a yearly chapter with a feature, a main story quest line, and a 12-player PvE trial. This one's called the Lucent Citadel, and trials are ESO's large-scale raids. They're very good. They're different in appearance. Mechanics can be very hard if you don't have high damage DPS as a team, and they offer a load of new collectibles, furnishings, dyes, achievements, and titles. And ESO really leans heavy into the group PvE element. It's something that I actually didn't like about the game. And what I didn't like about it is almost all of the good gear was related to to the trials rather than other content. Now, they tried their best to make crafting and dungeon and PvP gear, but it's almost always the best gear come from the trials. And this goes back to my original point about why people play MMORPGs. It's about playing with other people. And if you're a solo player, ESO has a lot for you, including this latest expansion, which always adds some new best in slot gear and so on. But it also kind of hinders your experience if you're just a solo player, because you're probably never going to be able to accomplish and do what you want because the game emphasizes group at endgame so heavily. So be aware, if you want to jump in and do the story as a solo player and some dungeons and other things, you can do that. But if you're going to take it serious and want the best in the slot, latest sweaty gear, it's going to be brutal, if not impossible for you to do so. Another thing about the expansion is the ability to customize skills. So this wasn't spell crafting per se, it was just modifying and adjusting and creating your own new skills. Now, the skills were kind of meh at the beginning when it launched, and mainly players figured out 2 to 3 very good and advantageous ones, especially for support builds. So it's seen a lot of fun and has made PvP more enjoyable for some players, but the design was a bit cumbersome in terms of the amount of time you had to spend in order to get the specific parts of the skill that you wanted. So the scribing system made you do things in the game, like maybe the 10 kill rat quest over and over and over every single day for weeks on end, just so you could get one component of a script that you needed for a specific spell. So you ask yourself, sometimes playing these MMOs and ESO in particular, why am I grinding this content, spending 90% of my game time just so I can enjoy the 10%? Now, ESO does a better job on this and cuts down a lot of that needless grind with different systems and ways to transmute gear and so on, but it's always a recurring theme in MMORPGs, spending time doing things you don't want so you can do the things that you do want with good gear. Moving on to something I'm super passionate about and thought was one of the best parts of Elder Scrolls Online, and that's PvP. So before I break down PvP, this was kind of an interesting thing that happened in 2024 is they introduced a two-sided battleground. So update 44 introduced 8v8. Now, why this is relevant is Elder Scrolls Online is originally marketed as a massive large-scale PvP game inside of Cyrodiil with a tri-faction, that's 3 different sides fighting over keeps, outposts, getting Emperor, and so on. Now, the strength of Cyrodiil is it is the most fun you can possibly have, in my opinion, open world PvP 24/7, huge, massive keep battles, 1v1ing, doing things in open fields, getting scrolls. It's just absolutely epic. The downside is twofold. Is one, the servers could never really hold up, and so you had lag and disconnects and all sorts of tech issues, and it just never got resolved. Number 2 is the population. As it's an MMORPG, a lot of your fun, especially if you're playing PvP against other players, is population dependent. And ESO in particular has suffered lower population over the years, which I'll show you later in this video, but it really influenced the fun factor in PvP. Because after a while, if you have no one to group up with, you have nothing to do solo, you kind of wonder, why am I playing this game? So moving on to PvP in more of a detail, you have Cyrodiil, the big, huge, massive sprawling zone. You have battlegrounds, which were 4v4v4, and now introduce another system that is 4v4 or 8v8. And then you have Imperial City, which is one of the most cool parts of PvP in any MMO I've ever seen. It's a zone that has its own currency and is a mix between PvE and PvP, where when you die, you get a portion of your currency Telvar taken from you. This allows for these awesome encounters that are organic while you're farming this currency that can be used to buy really valuable items and makes PvP more of an adrenaline rush than versus you can just die over and over with no consequences. So the PvP in ESO has a lot of variety. It has instance-based like Battlegrounds. It has PvE, PvP blend like Imperial City, and it has this sprawling, beautiful, awesome open world Cyrodiil, which is the end game gameplay loop for hardcore PvP players. The issue is, once again, the population is what holds us back in the performance from being a top tier PvP game. What I love about playing ESO is as soon as level 10, you can start basically doing PvP in Cyrodiil or Battlegrounds. So within a few hours of playing the game, you can jump into PvP and just do that as your end game play loop if that's what you want. When I go play other MMORPGs, I have to sit and spend 40, 30 hours unlocking X and Y and Z before I can introduce to PvP, and it's such a snooze fest. No, ESO allows you the freedom to play. And those are the two recurring themes that are the strength of this game. It's the freedom to go anywhere anywhere and do what you want, but also the lore and the storytelling. Now, moving along to combat. This is a controversial one. So ESO combat is very different than your normal tab target snooze fest 1.5-second global cooldown, where your abilities on the 30-minute timer and you're just using a macro. You know who you are in chat. But in all seriousness, people coming from other MMOs like World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy find this action-based system a huge turnoff. But me, it's what kept me playing for years and years and years and years. You can dodge, you can block, you have to balance your stamina, magic, and obviously your health. And unlike other MMORPGs, every class can heal themselves. And I'm not talking with just potions. So you can use healing spells and mana, you can dodge roll and hold block with stamina, and you're balancing this endless resource cycling. And you can use light and or heavy attacks. Heavy attacks give you back resource. So you have a permanent way to basically have infinite resources and essentially infinite survivability if you don't take as much damage at a time. And you have 5 abilities with an ultimate, and you're allowed to bar swap, giving you an extra set of abilities in the ultimate. So you're constantly bar swapping, light attack, heavy attack, using abilities back and forth depending on what you need at the time. Mastering combat is almost impossible in ESO because it's so quick, snappy, fluid, and hard to manage unless you've played for years and years and years. Your eyeballs constantly have to scan your potions, your ultimate, your resources like your health, your magic, and the stamina, and balance everything with survivability, damage, and utility. So if you are used to tab target games, this could be a huge turnoff to you. If you love action games in general, this will be absolutely fantastic for you to play. Because when I go play other MMOs with a 1.5-second or a 2-second global cooldown with these long abilities on super long cooldowns and animations, it's just so boring. I want to dodge, I want to block, I want to jump over and over and over, I don't know why, but I want to move and have the freedom to move. And ESO's combat is so fun. It's what keeps you coming back and playing over and over and over. And just when you get good on one class and one build, you swap to a new one and have endless amount of hours of gameplay right there and with something new. Next is leveling and catching up. So when you go to an MMO or you're wondering, should I come back and play? You're always asking yourself, can I catch up? Do I have to grind for a gazillion hours to reach endgame? And MMORPGs are pretty unforgiving with this, but ESO's endgame content is much more accessible. So you can explore basically anywhere in Tamriel and get access to gear straight away. Also, the crafting system is extremely friendly and is one of the most solo friendly MMOs. So if you don't want to group up, you can just level up your crafting independently and craft somewhat on par gear. The issue with the gear specifically is the mythics, which require you to get 5 little treasure things and build this together to make some super OP item that you can only have one out at a time. Same with monster helms, same with trials gear sets. But for the average player looking for a solo friendly experience, you can jump in, acquire some gear in the open world just by roaming around, doing dungeons and quests and world bosses and dolmens, and have a really good time. And leveling in ESO is one of my favorite things ever in MMORPG. The reason why is it does such a good job of giving you a sense of progression at all times. Not only are you completing levels, but you're advancing your crafting. You may be getting champion points later as you unlock that system. You're getting better at the combat. You're unlocking new skills. When you get those skills leveled up, you can then morph them and give them some unique different thing. And you can respec pretty easily to try out new builds and new combinations of skills. Then you get different weapon types and different gear sets and you play around with that. And what it means is you can essentially see your character getting more powerful by the second when you play. And it also feels like other MMORPGs, when I go play them, I'm stuck in the mud for hours. I remember Thrones and Liberty, where I was playing about 10 hours and I'm like, did I make any progress today? Not with ESO. And you can hit endgame within a couple hours of just doing these endgame little grind, killing the same skeletons over and over type of thing. Now, the endgame catch-up mechanic is going to be pretty hard. The game revolves around typically the newest and latest raid and or trial. There's normal mode and veteran mode, which veteran mode is meant for the best absolute gear. Normal mode is very accessible and you can just jump in at super low level even and get items. You're going to want until you get champion points 160, which is an advanced form of progression. But just to keep it simple it is much easier to jump back in this game or start fresh and basically reach endgame within 100 hours and have relevant gear. Final Fantasy XIV, World of Warcraft, and some of these other games, this is not going to be the case. ESO does not force you to complete the main story quest. It incentivizes you with skill points and you want to see the story, but you don't have to. You can fire up a new account, grind it up, get some champion points unlocked, start your crafting, get gear, jump into the raid, jump into PvP, and within 100 hours, you're pretty much caught up to some of the other characters. Now, you're not gonna be mid-max, but it's enough that makes it competitive to jump back in even 10 years. Or if you're coming back to the game and you've already had those crafting leveled up, you have the champion points, it'll be pretty easy to jump back into some dungeons and trials and or PvP. Next up is classes and builds. And this is one of the most important things to know about ESO. So it has a lot going for it in terms of classes and builds because there's so many combinations of things that you can do and really customize your character. There are 4 base game classes in Elder Scrolls Online, with 3 more locked behind DLCs and or expansions that require purchases. So you have the dragonknight. This is kind of like your damage dealing over time, melee focus using the flame whip. It's awesome. It's an amazing class. It plays off of using ultimates and getting resources back. Nightblades are your typical stealth type rogue build. They can go invisibility, which is kind of a unique thing. And also they can keep recasting this as long as you have the resource. Sorcerers are your typical range caster. You can play at magic or stam, melee or range. They have incredible speed and use lightning on themselves. And you have the Templar, kind of like your holy warrior paladin. They can strong heal. They're not as mobile, but can play range or melee and have some interesting gameplay mechanics. Then you have the Warden, which is kind of like a hippie Templar. You can heal, but you have a little bit better mobility and you still retain utility and damage. You have the Necromancer, which is a little bit more complex. The build works by creating corpses, then somewhat consuming them to do powerful and enhanced things. And then also they released the Arcanist, which is a new class, typically the best, and it uses a long animation beam. It can play range, melee, healer, tank, DPS, whatever you need. The Arcanist currently is one of the best. What separates ESO apart from others is 1, it's easy to level, and 2, it's fun to play the other classes and experiment with them. Having alts is really rewarding because you can go do daily events on different characters and really upgrade your currency and or collect a bunch of loot per day. So ESO wants you to play a bunch of different characters. The downside of the classes is this. Most of them use almost the exact same sets of skills and ultimates. What you really have is these classes are now, with the hybridization of the game, all come down to your passives. So almost every skill bar as an in-game PvE DPS looks almost the same, plus or minus 1 or 2 skills in ultimate. And the same with PvP. They almost run the exact same skills because there is always going to be a meta and it's hard to get away from it. So you're incentivized to play different classes, but they all look and feel the same, maybe minus a main spammable and a passive here and there. So it kind of homogenizes the feel of the classes, and the hybridization has made it less punishing for players that don't know the meta skills to pick, but also makes the game less unique and the classes don't feel as nearly as varied as they had in the past. Okay, next up is ESO population. As I've said before, MMO is dependent on people, and if you don't have it, then you're probably not going to play. And after 10 years, ESO is kind of in the same spot. The population has slowly gone down. As I look in the last 30 days, the average player base on Steam charts is under 10,000. Now, this does not include everybody because you don't need to play Elder Scrolls Online on Steam. It doesn't cover the consoles, so the game's population is much bigger than this. But you can see the game trending down over time. I don't mean to point this out to dog on the game. What I mean is ESO has not done a good job of attracting new players to the game, primarily because what it aims to do currently is retain the current players that keep the game making money. The current player base is around 3 different individuals. All group PvPers that run around spamming abilities in a group laughing at people that are playing solo and teabagging them. You know who you are. And PvE raiders, so people that take the endgame PvE progression seriously and do that. And then you have housing enthusiasts. These are people that love the ESO housing system, like tinkering around, decorating, doing collectibles, and so on. So when there's a new DLC, there's a new chapter, yeah, you'll get a big influx, maybe 20% of player base, but you're not getting a 200, 300, 400x increase, because that's one of the main issues of ESO. It kind of holds on and retains that same 10,000 players, but doesn't do a good job of incentivizing new people to come in and check it out. It's catering to the same players, not the new ones. I've had some of the best experiences of my life playing ESO. I've met some of the coolest people in the world playing ESO. ESO and Bethesda have treated me fantastic, and I say this not to dog on the game or denigrate it, but that's just the truth. So if you're wanting a robust game that has an enormous population, this is probably not for you. However, if you want a game that has a stable population, population of people that really love playing it, then Elder Scrolls definitely is for you. Next up is monetization. Buckle up for this one. Okay, so ESO is a buy-to-play game, meaning you have to buy the game initially. So the quote-unquote base game sometimes can cost you $10 to $20, and you can get it on sale. Then you have a monthly sub. The sub costs around $15. Now, the sub does give you a lot of perks. So it gives you crafting bag, which holds a bunch of stuff, extra XP, but the main benefit is the DLC content. So you'd have to normally buy them separately with in-game currency, but now you can unlock everything just by paying a sub. It's everything but the latest chapter/expansion. So DLCs are just tack on, usually quarterly, and then the expansion is a big, huge new system or something like that. So you buy the game initially, you sub to it, and then you buy the expansion typically once a year. And they have tons of in-game currency cash shop things, and the game can be very, very expensive. Specifically, housing is absolutely bonkers and wild. They sell some in-game houses for $200. That sounds bizarrely overpriced for me, but people pay it, and they pay it in spades. In fact, a lot of the in-game thing in Elder Scrolls Online is simply making in-game currency and converting that currency into crowns, which is the in-game currency, and using those crowns to buy houses or other cosmetics. So that's what in-game PvEers do, is they try to make money, they flip the marketplace, and they convert that into crowns so they can buy their fancy houses, which I don't understand, but people love them. But the big one is ESO pay to win? And it just depends on how you define pay to win, to be honest. I don't think so. So what ESO does is it sells you a new chapter or expansion, right? And what does that chapter or expansion have? Well, it's going to have a new end game system. That new end game system is somehow going to increase your power, and it's going to have new end game gear, which is, you guessed it, going to have some ability to increase your power. Do you have to pay for that? No, you don't have to, but if you're an active player, likely you're going to do that to keep up with the meta. Every game has to do this to keep the lights on. You can disagree with me and blast me in the comments, but it's a business, not a soup kitchen. So they need people to keep coming in and playing their game. Unlike Lost Ark or Throne of Liberty, you can't just go buy items from the cash shop. So they haven't done that yet, and I don't think they ever will. And that's kind of what gaming is on a live service game. They need to entice you to keep coming back and keep playing. Destiny 2, World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy, everyone does it. Does that make it right? Does it make it not pay to win? I don't know. But that's my stance on it, is you can't go buy items from the cash shop like Throne of Liberty, but you're going to have to keep up with the end game treadmill by buying the latest expansion. So don't shoot the messenger, I'm just telling you the truth. All right, moving on to content and replayability. So ESO's replayability is ridiculously big. I mean, it kept me playing for about 10 years, and I don't play nearly as much. And I'll just tell you why. The reason I don't play ESO much anymore is I lost touch with a lot of people that I used to play with. So it really feels like a solo game for me, and I log in and I kind of don't know what to do anymore. Because for the most part, I've accomplished everything. I got tons of champion points, I got tons of gear, I've become emperor, I've done the trials, and I've done the raids. And so you log in, you're kind of wondering, like, what is there to do? But for a lot of people, it's not that way, because there's so much to progress in the game. You can level a character, you can level up multiple, you can do champion points, you can collect over 400 gear sets, you can do a gazillion achievements, you can build your houses like I've talked about earlier. They even have a card game. I don't know if anyone plays it still, but they got it. You can transmog your character and make it look fancy. You can jump into Cyrodiil and do PvP and try to be emperor and brag to everyone how great you are. There is just a simple, endless amount of stuff to do, especially if you're not a meathead like me and driven by dominating other people in PvP. I know it's toxic, but seriously, if you're not, and you just like achievements, you just like questing, you like rolling around and kind of playing a solo RPG, this content has a gazillion hours for you, and it's pretty cheap if you just buy the base game and don't even sub. But what holds it back from me constantly playing is, again, the people that I used to play with don't. I'm not Mr. Social Butterfly over here anymore, so MMORPGs can sometimes be hard to make friends and having a cohesive group that stays together. More commonly, what I'm seeing is people bounce from game to game to game. But if you jump into ESO or other MMORPGs and you find that cohesive group that does PvP raid nights, they do PvE raid nights, and you're doing trials, you're getting to know each other, you're trashing each other in Discord, having a good time, then it's worth staying in the game and playing basically indefinitely. And that's why you have that same stable population on the Steam charts, is because those people have found a home in the game. They really like the socializing. There's enough for them to do to keep them stimulated and coming back with the updates, so they can play indefinitely. So what makes ESO stand out in 2025? It's basically highly accessible for solo players, and you can jump in and start pretty much right away, and it's pretty easy to get involved and start making progress and having fun. You can explore zones, complete quests, you can do crafting, housing, PvP, PvE. There's a lot to do in the game, and you can feel connected to the main story, and the main story blows away a lot of other MMORPGs because they're voice acted. There's continuity from the main story quest, the DLCs, and the expansions, and it's really the strength of Elder Scrolls Online. This is what they spend a lot of their time and attention doing, is developing a very thoughtful narrative that expands on the Elder Scrolls lore and that gets players coming back over and over and over to see what's next, what new figure, what new bad guy, what new protagonist is going to be here and there, and you see a recurring theme throughout. So my final thoughts on Elder Scrolls Online. It's one of my favorite games all time. I'm very thankful for Elder Scrolls Online because it kind of launched my career in content creation. I would think for me to come back to the game, it would have to have a lot of PvP improvements, specifically to the server and the population. So I can deal with overpowered classes and mythics and items and gear, but it needs to feel alive. There needs to be some level of hype, a lot of people excited about playing it, not just complaining. And for me, I just don't do the housing, dress up, transmog, stuff like that. So that's limited for me, and I'm not Mr. Social Butterfly and having a group that I go play with every night. So it's hard to keep someone like me engaged when there's not that endgame hamster wheel for me to do. So that's why you kind of jump from game to game to game. But if you find your home, Elder Scrolls Online is one of the best to have. It has a great community of wonderful people, very thoughtful, kind, fun to hang out with. Well, unless you're talking with PvP crowd. But no, seriousness, they are very great to play with. Well, what's in store for the Elder Scrolls Online in 2025? Recently, on December 17, 2024, ZeniMax Online Studio Director Matt Firer shared his thoughts about the future of the game, and I'm going to summarize what's in store for the future. Number one, ESO is going to shift away from annual chapters. So starting in 2025, ESO will no longer follow the annual chapter release model. Story content remains the focus, but it will shift to diverse, bite-sized kind of content updates throughout the year, launching under a seasonal model, roughly 3 to 6 months each. This approach allows content to be released when ready, improving efficiency and variety according to the developers. So number two is they're going to introduce the season. Seasons will feature themed story content, event, dungeons, and more. Smaller, more frequent updates will replace massive annual releases alongside some larger content already in development. Number three is experimentation and change. The development team will test a new system addressing long-standing player feedback, including but not limited to Cyrodiil PvP improvements. Well, we've heard this before. Overland combat difficulty adjustments, visuals, animations, group sizes like for Kragorn, and guild management tools. Number four, improve new and returning player experience. I've talked about this as well, but they're going to try to streamline the process for new players. So you're going to be introduced to the Wailing Prison tutorial, just the base game tutorial, and it might be a streamlined quest series with limited options. As a new player, you're kind of overwhelmed, so they're really aiming to make this a lot less cumbersome. Number five is focusing on storytelling. So with a lot of this content being introduced, they're going to expand on existing zones and storylines, reviving hallmark factions like the Dark Brotherhood and the Thief Guilds, and splitting larger zones into multiple updates. So looking ahead, you can expect the first season to be revealed in April of 2025, and a content update is planned for March of 2025. So my opinion on this, what this overall means with the 10-year model of these massive chapters and DLCs constantly just pushing the development cycle, the writing was kind of on the wall. Starting last year, they had some throttling down of always having a quarterly release. ESO had delivered a massive amount of content over years at a staggering pace, and I just don't think the output is going to be there for them going forward. They already have a lot of great content, so it makes sense on just expanding what they already have instead of making these overhauling massive, big new areas and zones. Something that I would love to see within the seasonal model is limiting gear sets. There's over 400 gear sets, tons of monsters and mythics. What will be really interesting, unique for players is limiting a certain amount of monsters, mythics, and 5-piece gear sets, so the meta constantly changes and you're not using the same 5 gear sets on every single build for basically eternity. Will that happen? I don't know. Speculation, something I'd like to see on my part, but that's what you can expect in ESO 2025. So in 2025, should you play ESO? I would say if you're a solo player, you love lore, you love exploring, you love achievements, and crafting and tinkering around 100%. If you're a PvP tryhard sweatlord like me, I would say no. Till the PvP population comes back and or the servers are fixed, this game you probably want to stay away from. If you got something out of this video, hit that thumbs up, like, subscribe, do all that stuff. Thanks for watching.